welcome David Vignolli, so author of New World and then Girl in the Himalayas, which you can find in any good bookstore, but please take a look after David's talk. David is also the founder of Visual Scribing, so he actually gets to draw as a day job, so not just on the side doing comics. So hopefully he can tell you how to do that, how to actually draw all the time and get paid for it, and have books. So please welcome David, and think of any questions afterwards. So if you have any questions, and then we can look at them.
Thank you, Nora. So welcome all of you. So it's a pleasure to be here talking at the South Norwood Public Fair. I just shouldn't interrupt the mic. Shall I speak in the mic, or can you all hear? Okay, perfect. So I'll talk a little bit about first my experience now with comics and how I started actually creating illustrations, when it all started, and then we can have later a Q&A. I'll be talking also a little bit about how can I draw and make my living out of it as well. So I'll start first because I'm originally from Brazil. So I'll start a little bit where it all started. It started in a newsstand, and it's funny because in Brazil you have all these comic books in the newsstand. So you have Batman, Superman, and all these characters you can find in the newsstand, full of magazines and all mixed up. So that's where it all started. And I started first with it's a comic book for children called Turma da Mônica, or Monica's Gang. And this was my first introduction to comics. And I love these characters, and they are part of the childhood of, I think, all of Brazilians. And it's interesting because it's Brazilian characters as well. They became so popular that they have like now a film. And they also have graphic novels that's more for adults, also based in the same characters, because the artists, they grew up reading these comics, and now they are adults, they want to do like graphic novels, something a little bit more interesting for adult audience as well. So this was the beginning, all the start. And it's interesting because my generation was much more connected to these characters, but my mom's generation, she was reading the Little Lulu, like more American comics, Donald Duck, but we were lucky to have Brazilian comics as well. And they became so popular that even we had like a crossover with this DC characters, when actually the DC, I don't know if you know, like there is an editor, Jim Lee, editor of comic books, and then when he came to Brazil, he was so impressed at how big the comic book world is there that they wanted to do a DC characters together with Monica's Gang as well. So I started actually with comics because at first when you go to superheroes, for me it was very difficult to engage, to be related to those illustrations, because there were a little bit too many lines, so that's why I started with Monica, and then I came to, and I remember this was the first comic that I have seen on the newsstand, and then I said, I want to read that. And this Hulk, it's actually the Grey Hulk, that still didn't appear in the films, but I'm sure that at some point will appear. But this is the artist that I like the most. It was Todd McFarlane, a Canadian artist, and this was actually what brought me into making comics. I remember that even this font, this character, I remember because we had in the newsstand the regular comics, but you had comics coming from the US, only the comic shops. And I remember coming to my dad, Dad, they've got Spawn #1. And if I buy these comics, I'm sure that in 20 years this will be worth millions. We have to get it. And then my father, okay. And then we went to the comic shop, and I don't know, like $100 or something, we got this copy. But it's nowadays also not worth much, this comic. So there are so many copies. And this was actually that boom of Image Comics. Everyone was buying a lot of comics because they thought that would be worth millions later. But this was the beginning. And then I decided to do graphic design. So I thought, okay, it's difficult to live from making comics, so I would do graphic design. It was something like closer, no, to making comics. So I went to university in Rio, and this is a photo there of when I graduated. And then I move on, and then I moved to Europe. And I think one thing that's interesting, because in my journey, I think I'm pretty much moved by emotion. So for me to come to Europe would be impossible. I never really would be so much interest because it's cold and everything. You know, in Brazil, it's very cold there, but it's the hot. That's why I put the picture of me and my wife, because I had to fall in love to come to Europe. That's why I came to Europe. And then I started doing scribing, as Nora was telling. I started doing scribing. I discovered scribing actually was a job for a company in London, because I came to Europe, but I came to Austria. First, I spent 5 years there in Austria, and then I got to know that in London there's something called visual scribing, so that you can draw conferences. You can go to conference and people talk about finance, and then you turn all that jargon into some pictorial images. And I found it very, very nice to do, because you know, a lot of times these talks, they are very dull, and people really get bored very quickly. But once they see these cartoons, they think, oh my God, it's fun. This dull content, it can be very fun. So I started doing a lot of scribing, and then later I started this company, Visual Scribing, with my wife as well. And we started now like doing animations. We do like different kinds of graphical representation to translate complex sort of concepts. And then after, you know, like this was interesting, because when I moved to graphic design, I moved a little bit away from drawing. But coming back to scribing, I was connected more to my dream, my childhood dream of being a comic book artist. And then I started doing these comic books with my brother. I have also some copy here for free for all of you later. And we started like doing these comic books about mostly, actually it's based on Indian tradition. It's fun, I come from Brazil, but my passion, because I do yoga, so I pretty much connected to India, to Indian mythology. So I always was fascinated about these gods, these sages meditating in the Himalayas. And then we created some high fantasy with my brother about this. And then it was a little bit too complex. And then my wife said, well, why you don't do like, well, don't tell a story of one character, and it's about this character, but when she's a girl, and when she's going to this world, to this fantastic world. So we turn more this high fantasy to low fantasy, or a fantasy that people can relate easier, because it takes place in the real world. And that's how it created a girl in the Himalayas. So it's this girl who lives in a human world, lives in a village in the Himalayas, and then she's lost there in the Himalayas. There's a snowstorm, and she's about to die, and then an ancient warrior, a immortal warrior, sees her dying there in the Himalayas. And then he's about to interfere in the destiny of a human. But if he interferes in the destiny of a human, in the fate of that girl, he will lose his immortality. So what happens? That he decides to save that innocent girl and gives up actually the immortality, and in that moment he starts to age. He starts to get very old, because he's a being that lives like for thousands of years. So in that moment he gains all the weight from all those years. So then I created this story, and then the challenge a lot of times is to find a publisher, and someone who with you will bring the story to the world. And I mean, just a little bit about research. This was in the Himalayas. I went to India, flew from New Delhi to Dharamshala, and then I was there scribing, doing some research, talking to people to really feel how it's the atmosphere. And it's really very spiritual experience. It's very silent, and it's very deep, very profound experience that you have in the Himalayas. It's a completely different than what you have, for example, in Rio. Now it's very loud, a lot of people talking, but there in the Himalayas you can really experience this silence. And this was just a sketch. Again, a little bit like scribing, but I like to, you know, as that film is happening in your head, and you just write down the main plots of the story. And I also like to use some visual references. So this is a lot of the story, a lot of ideas for the stories there, and then later I edit, and some things will make to the book, and some other things are not going to make to the book. And I looked in the website, and have seen a lot of different publishers, but most of the publishers, they don't accept submission, unsolicited submissions. And then I found Archaea, that's it's a publisher in the United States. And then I sent to them 5 pages, and they got really interested. Wow, I really like what you've done. Can you send it more pages? Just with 5 pages, no, they have to evaluate if it's worth publishing or not. But then I sent to them like the rest, 80 pages, and they said, okay, let's publish it. And this is also a sketch, because for me it works much more visual. So I do some sketches now of the characters, I do already how it's going to work in terms of narrative. And then I write the dialogues, and the dialogues are all in Portuguese. I try to write as close as possible to my mother tongue, so that's easier for me. And so once the editors, they got this 80 pages, they said, David, no, it's not finished yet. You have to add more, 40 pages at least. And I was working with editors now, because I think this is a very interesting part of the process, because it's not anymore your vision, but it becomes a vision of a collective vision in a way. And the editors, the good thing about these editors, the camera Chitok and Sierra Han, I even did an illustration later for them as a way to express my gratitude. But the nice thing about working with editors, because they really can guide you, no? Along the way. There is even some famous kind of editors, no? But if we use the parallel with movies, in Star Wars, a lot of people say that, you know, it was a producer film, that George Lucas really didn't know how to get the movie there, and the producer, no, change this, change that, and now you have a classic, isn't it? So working with editors was very good, because they really helped me to finish. So I had to create a scribe of the whole story, because once you can overview the whole story, you understand, these elements I used in the beginning, so they have to be in the end, no? Because the stories is like, I think it was Mark Twain who said that they have to make sense. It's different than life, because things have to make sense in the story. I also use some post-it notes, so it's also very visual process as well. And also this is interesting, because I also try to make a breakdown for how many pages I need to do per week, and always when I finish one page I mark there in green, so you have an idea. And it's also very important to organize, otherwise it's a chaos not to finish. And this is also good to have a publisher, because they will press on you to say, where are the pages, where are the pages? So these are just some examples of pages that I've done. And I try to also use, like, not so many colors. I mean, just like a sepia, no? Like a tone with a watercolor, because I also think that would be quicker, the process. And so I decided to do it in this way. And then after that, it was so successful that they said, okay, David, now we want a new book from you. And then I was thinking about to tell a story that represents also who I am. This is also, if you see a lot of publishers and authors talking, they say that it's very important that you tell things that are really connected to you. So the first, I was exploring more this love for yoga, for Indian culture, and this I was talking more about New World, about my background, Brazil, and it's interesting because the New World, it's when I spoke to my editor, no, I want to talk about indigenous slavery, slaves, enslaved people, and whites in the Americas, and then said, David, I don't think it's a book for you. I said, why? No, because, you know, you're not black, you're not, you know, you don't have this background. I said, no, I actually have the three backgrounds. Because the funny thing that in Brazil especially, there was a lot of mixture. So I'm at the same time African, indigenous, and European. The funny thing, or the bizarre thing, is that culturally, the Europeans, they destroy all the culture. So I don't know, for example, I don't speak any African language nor indigenous. Because the church used to say, well, no, this is bad. This is a backwards sort of a culture, so we don't have any culture, any connection to these cultures. So I decided to explore this side. And I wanted to create a story, still with fiction, that would represent these three cultures coming together, and that clash now of worlds coming together, but at the same time they have to work together to destroy a monster that's going to try to conquer the new world. So this is Iracema, Amacai, and Bartolomeu. So the typical representation of the three ethnic groups, I would say. So the Iracema is the indigenous who has this this lightning bolt, no? So she releases some sort of a lightning from her bowl. And Amacai, he has a flute, and it has this power of revealing the true nature of people. So once he plays a flute, if someone is actually a monster hidden in a human body, it's going to be revealed. And Bartolomeu, it's a Portuguese who has a magical ship who can travel in the speed, light speed, and he's actually connected to this ship. So he's actually, how can I say, spiritually connected. So once he gets into meditation, he can move the ship just by his mind's control. Okay. And I wanted to explore also the word America. I don't know if any of you are familiar where America comes from, the name America. You don't know, right? And it's interesting because the America is the land of Americo Vespucci, sorry. And this is an Italian guy who came to actually he never went to what we call America. And it's funny because America actually it was called the three Americas, North, South, Central, and South. So this was all called America. I think the importance now of the United States to turn America in one country, but he was never in America. And it was funny because he actually wrote a letter that he was the one who discovered America. So everyone thought at some point that was Americo Vespucci, and then later they realized that it was actually a fake news. This was actually Cristobal Colombo. But at that time, when they gave the name to the continent, it was Americo, from Americo Vespucci. And another interesting thing is that he was one of the first guys who realized that actually they haven't got to India, no? Because they were trying to reach India. They were trying to reach India, but then they got to this land and they thought that they are getting to India. But Americo realized that it was a new world. Okay, this is not India at all, this is a new world. So that's why he's also very important and gives the name also of the book. And there are some scenes of Americo Vespucci there in getting to the new world in the book as well. So this was also, it's interesting because the depiction also of indigenous, it looks like European because this is an illustration. Very old, and people didn't have an imagination how an indigenous person would look like. Also the animals, they are all kind of fantastic, you know, they don't really exist. But it's very interesting. And this, I wanted just to show a little bit how my studio looks like. That's all these books were created. And this also, I also create a book for research. I think it's very nice to keep it. Because there I write also historical facts. I do also like scribing, create some illustrations, some text. And this I had to study a little bit of Portuguese history. Just to give you an example here, because it's all in Portuguese. But for example, at that time, atheism didn't exist. Everyone believed in God, and everyone was Christian, and that was it. And then I write that down because this might help also in the story as well. But it's a very interesting thing. So I went also to Portugal. I love these maps. I think they're very colorful and interesting. But you can see here that it's the Portuguese, what they call Portuguese America, and you have the Spanish America around it. Also look at the ships, because the ships also, I think, one of the most difficult things to draw. I tend to like to draw mostly like faces and expressions. And again, the same style as I did in Girl in the Himalayas. Here is it's some pages, so I have in this book a lot of the thumbnails, no? Of how the story would be told. And this is actually something that it challenges. It's a challenge for me because I'm more kind of story-oriented, like character-oriented, than plot-oriented. So I like much more to write the story and then later to check if it's working or not. But this one I was working with the editor, and the editors, they like to see the plots, not the story, what's going on, what's going to happen, and so on. I created also a font for this book, also using my handwriting. It's very nice, I think, because it always gives some nice touch to the illustration. And I was also researching these monsters here. And that's how I based one of the monsters in the book. You can see here orca, no? The orc, whale, balena. It's a whale, no? It's in these old maps. I found them fascinating. And one of the concepts also of the book is that somehow the Portuguese, they managed to control the monsters, no? So that's how they are basically conquering the New World. And this is actually an illustration, an old illustration that shows exactly the King of Portugal controlling a monster as well. So the concept comes from an old painting that they are, you know, they have this power in the oceans. And at that time, the Portuguese and the Spanish, and it's really funny because at some point in the past they divided the world in two. So this belongs to Portugal and this belongs to Spain. So it's very interesting. But the key point here is really how the Portuguese, how the white, black, and the indigenous, they come together to unite the forces to kill this monster, to kill this this power of oppression, let's say. Because this is something that I have always inside, because when I went to Africa, or when here in Europe, somehow I'm related, I'm connected now, because my ancestors at some point they came from here. That's why my surname is Vignolli. It's come from Italy or from Africa. I don't know the surnames because the surnames don't come in the name, but somehow I'm really connected, and I found that would be a good book to bring everyone together, to have sort of this connection, and that's what I thought that would be some original idea coming in this book. And just to finalize, I want to, a lot of people, they ask me, how's the Brazilian comic scene? And there is actually a convention called Comic-Con Experience in São Paulo. And it's bizarre because most of people don't know, but it's bigger in numbers than the San Diego Comic Con. So there's a lot of people who come, and for sure there's a lot of mixture, like cinema, comics, and different things. But the Arts Alley, it's one of the biggest Arts Alley, and it's also the heart of the Comic Con. And I found it's really nice because in a lot of Comic Cons that you go, the comics, they're just the corner. Like, people who like comics, they don't have so much money, so let's put on the corner. So, and this is it's a very nice convention, also very, very nice design they brought. And yeah, it's just to show a little bit how the scene is in Brazil. So thank you very much. I don't know if I spoke too much.
No.
I've got a couple of questions about your first book. You said that the publisher asked you to change it from 80 pages to 120 pages.
Yeah.
Did they tell you why they wanted you to do that?
Yeah, so because I think it was, they wanted to market, because once you go to the editors, they want to know how to market that book. And they said that for young adults, they wanted a book of 120 pages. It has to have at least 120 pages. That's why, and they said 8 is too small. Yeah.
And was there anything from your 8 pages that you'd already done? Was there anything that the editor asked you to change? Was that a making process?
They didn't ask to change, but they asked to conclude kind of arcs that weren't concluded before. So because I left before open end, and then they went, no, we want this conflict that you build here should be concluded, because especially the first book, they say that it's almost like a film in a way. It has to have an end. If there is a sequel, good, but if there is no sequel, it has to be, how can I say, contained in that book.
What program did you use to make your font with?
What software?
You made your own font and stuff.
Yeah.
What program did you use?
So there is it's actually an online program called Calligraph. Yeah.
Cool. And your first 2 comics you did with your brother, were those self-published or were they publishers?
They were self-published.
And which do you prefer, self-publishing or publishing with a publisher?
I think, like in terms of distribution, it's much better to have a publisher. But in terms of freedom, it's much better to have a kind of a self-published production. And also in terms of rights, if you have to adapt to some other media, if you have a publisher, you always will be sharing. And sometimes it's the communication, sometimes it's slower now with the publisher.
Yeah.
So I think there is advantages and disadvantages. For my case, I also didn't want to storage in the garage. I didn't have space to store the books, so that's why I also look for a publisher.
Which is more stressful, because like I'm publishing mine at the moment, it's like, again,
Because I even forgot, because the New World, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar, there's also the Eisner Award. So this one was nominated to Eisner. So, you know, it's difficult when you self-publish, if you want to project more your book. So it's much more difficult. So, yeah, it's a balance. If there is something that you want to create a series, so I think maybe it would be better to self-publish. If it's one book, like one book story, I think I would find a publisher. But it's always good to try, it's always good to try and see what works for you. Because sometimes the stories, they are also so personal, that sometimes they are not so commercial, but they are so important to you.
yeah.
And I think the most important really to tell a story that you feel like, oh, I have to tell the story, something that you really love.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
That's it. I'm back. So I really love how much historical detail you put into your research. Why? I have two parts. Why is it so important to you to have the history to be accurate? This funding, this going into the story, especially for the New World. And second, because you have so much research and the illustrations and all the things that you made, how much of that goes into the book itself, and how much of it, and have you ever thought of publishing the notes and the research and the illustrations that have the background beyond the story as its own piece for people who are interested in that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, so I think there was. It's interesting because the medium of comics, especially in a graphic novel, in I think it's 180 or 160 pages, you cannot fit so much. You cannot fit so much. So I did a lot of research, and most of the things they didn't make to the book. So it's sometimes frustrating, and because, for example, you have imagine a TV series, like in 1 hour. You know, you can tell a lot, but I think in one book, it's maybe half of one episode. So you cannot also expand too much. And I tend also sometimes in my stories to go too much to place. That's why sometimes it's good to have the editor to tell you, don't go too far. No, you are telling too much, or you're going too crazy with this. So you have to keep sort of contained. Also, it's some sort of art of simplification, comic books. You don't have so many pages to tell long dialogues that you might have in a film. I don't know. There was something else that you wanted to know, or that answers your question.
No, that definitely answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, is it okay?
No.
So it's actually a follow-up to the same question about publishing the research, because I think your sketches and that research book, you said that there is an actual book that's a work of art itself, and I think for all creators, or especially people perhaps already invested in your work, but even if they're not, this is like an immensely interesting thing to explore. Not just because, okay, how much work do I need to put into it before it then becomes the actual work, but if maybe they also enjoy going down on those tangents, and do you know what I mean? So when you're showing us that book, does that book exist, or that's just something that you have just for yourself?
Yeah, just have for myself. So it exists, but it's just one copy.
One
just
copy.
For myself.
So I just think that would be perhaps an interesting thing to explore, and I don't know, obviously I don't want to give you advice, but people might put things on Kickstarter, etc. to gather interest, and then rather than you committing to copies or the number of copies, if you already have a followers base, just tell them, if you guys are interested in this, see how many of you are interested in this, and then I print you some. I, for one, would be really interested, and I just wonder if that's something that could, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I have got like a good feedback, but it wasn't like really, you know, because you know, like I would do that perhaps if there would be maybe a lot of requests for it. But I think it's a great idea.
Only do it on demand. So what I'm suggesting is like not like to say that not like something that you would invest perhaps time or money in it, but if it's on demand, then
Okay.
you know what I mean. It's like you will know how much to make, and maybe it would be quite a mutually rewarding thing for your audience. And
Yeah, I think this would be great. Yeah, it's a great idea. I'm sorry.
I just want to follow up that, you know, as a creator myself and as someone who would be interested in that. And especially, as you were saying, if it's kind of on something like Kickstarter, where you could even maybe send it digitally, and so it wouldn't be much cost for printing. You could just, you know, scan the pages, and for whoever is interested, offer it as an extra product to go alongside the book. I definitely think that there would be some people who would really like that, and you know, just be an extra way and an extra something to give to kind of, you know, your core fans.
Jim Rock did that with Octobriana. He like released a 400-page like process for making Octobriana, and in addition to the book, he's put on his Comrade or something like that. So you can just do it as a PDF, you know. So you don't have to, you know, you have to kind of print it unless you really want to. Like you just release it and then sell it for $5. So yeah.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
it's, you know, when it's you mentioned that you are also into animation. So sometimes if you see an animatic or something, or just the sketch version, that's just like there is so much. Like there is, but it's on a different level. It's rewarding on a different level compared to the finished work. So there is something, a lot to it, and doesn't, you know what I mean? So that could be, and I think it's especially relevant to you because what you've shown us, it is just so appealing, even at the research phase, how you like visual expressions and how you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was even thinking that because there's so much, as you said, and so much research in it that it can really, I think, create a nice book. I was even thinking how to do that. But yeah, I think it's. Thank you very much for that.
Well, I guess that's your next book. Is that Nancy? Good question.
Hi. You mentioned that there were a lot of barriers for publishers for accepting work unsolicited.
Yeah.
What did you do differently to essentially persuade someone to look at your work?
That's a good question because you know they have. I think they still have Archaea, still have online, so you can submit your manuscript or I think you have to send 5 pages, at least 5 to 10 pages. So their website, if you go, I have a YouTube channel where I created a video specifically for submissions to Archaea. So that I say more or less how you should actually subscribe, and it was really easy.
What's the minimum quantity of pages they would like to
Minimum, or
I mean, the minimum quantity.
you know, because they also they don't want too much. I think it's 10 pages. I think that the minimum it's 5. I think it's 5 pages. But in the website, I don't have the address here. But if you are Archaea submissions, so it's very simple because the other publishers they were very difficult not to contact them. But I think there is Archaea. There is also which first, second, Nobro as well. But there's not so many. No? I think most of them you would need an agent to contact them. So I didn't actually get an agent. So it was just really the submission online.
I heard that right. You say Archaea.
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 Yeah.
Archaea. H-A-I.
Yeah.
One last question. What are you working on at the moment? What's your next project?
Well, we already know his next book. The research. Yeah.
You know, I stopped actually after. I mean, during the pandemic, I was writing actually a script for a film, so I was exploring. It's funny because I always like to try different things, but I want to do something definitely about explore more slavery, but in a more always with fantasy, because that's what I grew up loving. So I always like to bring some sort of slavery aspect. And so I wanted to play a little bit, because there was one part in Brazilian history that we had like the coffee barons. The coffee barons, because I mean there's so much story that it's difficult sometimes to synthesize, but you know the royal family of Portugal came to Brazil, so Brazil Rio became at some point a capital, European capital outside of Europe, because the kings were there. It's almost like if Queen Victoria would go to Australia and then suddenly Sydney becomes the capital of the British Empire. So it's something like completely crazy. So but the royal family didn't have so much money, so they wanted to sell the titles, royal titles. So this became a baron, someone becomes I mean, not the royal titles that you can imagine. So that these coffee producers, they were very rich. So they bought a lot of baron titles, and they became the barons of coffee. But at the same time, Brazil became independent from Portugal at some point. But the slavery brought so much money that was the only American country who had the independence but didn't have the abolition of slavery. So there is this time where you have a Brazilian royal family, so you have the emperor, the princess, and you have the coffee barons, and you have the slaves. And also you have something that's very interesting, some cities where the slaves escape in the forest, and then they built these cities where white people, black people, they all live together, they're all free there in the city. So they have this sort of crazy environment where people are trying to capture the slaves, but they are fighting, take them to these cities where they are protected. So I want to do something in this universe, because I think it can be very interesting.
As a fellow Latin American, I am from Bolivia.
Oh, nice.
That's something that's not explored. Our history is very rich and very complex, how the societies were and how those societies affect us until this day, how those times of the colonies and those things that were imposed to us, they still affect us in our psychology.
Oh yeah. This is interesting because I think I would say that's even like in the whole kind of Americas. I mean, from my point of view, even the U.S. kind of depends a little bit in Britain to connect to this royal past or the culture aspect. And in South America, it's the same. There's some sort of feeling of inferiority, like we don't have the culture, because the culture in the Americas, they have like 500 years, so it's very, so we have to always to refer to Europe, like okay, this culture, and the indigenous go, this culture, barbarian culture.
When in reality they have very rich culture.
Yeah. For example, in Brazil you have this problem in the Amazon forest. So if you would have followed the indigenous, would never be burning the Amazon forest or cutting the wood.
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Look at David's work and stick
Oh, yeah.
around if you guys have any more questions.
And this is all for free, so you can take. Yeah. Oh yeah. So you can. There are probably some copies on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
I don't have it here.